My lords, we often talk about the way in which liberal democracy is in retreat in the part of the world that we've just been hearing about, particularly in Russia. I wonder whether we haven't put that question back to front. The Russian state was founded in 882. If we look at the period between its foundation and the present, it has been an autocracy for 1,120 years. There was a little moment of constitutional monarchy in 1905. There was the period between February and October 1917. And then, if we very generously count the early Putin years as well as the Yeltsin years, we can come up with 23 years in which Russia has adhered to something that we would recognize as the rule of law and representative government. That's not a whole lot of democratic muscle memory to fall back on. The point I want to make is that this is really very normal. One way of explaining the rise of Putin is to look at what happened in all of the other ex-Soviet states. What happened when the USSR suddenly broke apart and, in almost every case, outside the Baltics, went into some kind of autocracy? What was it that all of those strong men had in common? The Karimovs and the Aliyevs and so on. What was it? Charisma? Was it some demotic connection with their people? Was it intelligence? No. They just happened to be the Soviet officials who were in charge of the Uzbek SSR or whatever it was at the time when the breakup came. They suddenly found themselves in charge of sovereign states, and they very quickly set about ensuring that their grip on power would be unchallenged and that there would be a kind of one-party state. That's the norm, my lords. That's the sobering thought. Right? We, in Anglophone Western democracies, are the exception. The extraordinary thing is not the Putins and the Karimovs, it's the Washingtons. It's the people who don't try and set up hereditary dictatorial power. And that, I think, should make us aware of the fragility of our model and of the need constantly to defend it, not only by being ready proportionately to deploy arms in defense of freedom, but also to defend it intellectually and culturally at home. And this is, I think, where the challenge of the Shanghai Co-operation Organisation comes from. It's a fundamentally illiberal alternative model, and it's growing, and it's popular. And the reason that all these new countries are adhering to it is because that autocratic way of government appeals to something very deep in the human psyche. It's how we administered ourselves for the 10,000 years between the discovery of agriculture and a couple of hundred years ago at most, an eye blink in evolutionary terms. And that, I think, is why this matters. It's not because of the strategic importance of the region. Every region thinks it's strategically important, including Central Asia. When I was a new MEP, my noble friend Lord Callanan and I were put on the Central Asia delegation. When you were an MEP, if you were a goody-goody federalist, they gave you the Caribbean or South Africa. We were critics of the single currency, so they gave us Central Asia, and I'm very glad they did. I got to know the region pretty well, and I loved it, and I visit it still. I have friends there, but with the best will in the world, it is not of great strategic importance to us, not as a maritime country. Sir Holford Mackinder used to say it was the most important, the inventor of geostrategy, the key region, the heartland, right? Who controls the heartland controls the world. I mean, barely had he said that then the First World War came along and disproved him, and the Second World War also disproved him. It may have had some tangential relevance strategically to us at the height of the Great Game when Stoddart and Connolly were murdered in Bukhara in whenever it was, 1842, but it is a stretch to say that it matters to us now as an archipelago at the western tip of the Eurasian landmass. Why this matters is not for reasons of direct geostrategic interest, but because there is this cultural challenge, this alternative way of running our affairs, which appeals to people, including in the West. The reason that India and Pakistan and Iran and all of these places are adhering to organizations like the Shanghai Co-operation Organisation, the clue, by the way, is in the name in terms of who runs it. The reason they're adhering to it is because they think that our system is in decline. And one of the reasons they think that is because we keep telling them. We've become so ready to dismiss and distance ourselves from our own past. We have this extraordinary lack of self-confidence. And if our children get any history at all, we tend to present it as a kind of hateful chronicle of racism and exploitation. I would be prepared, I can't prove this, but I'd be prepared to defend the proposition that almost any child in a primary school in this country would be much more familiar with the names of Rosa Parks or Martin Luther King than with those of Lilburn or Locke or Wycliffe or Wilkes or Milton or Mill. That's just the Johns, right? We're not teaching them our own history of freedom and personal responsibility, of the elevation of the individual above the collective, and of the importance of the rule of law. And that, my friends, my lords, sorry, my friends, you are my dear friends, but my lords on both sides, that, my lords, is, it seems to me, our challenge as legislators. We need to emphasise that we are inheritors of this sublime tradition, and that it's better than the alternative, and that it raised the human race to a pinnacle of wealth and freedom, and that keeping that heritage going means teaching the next generation about why it is special and why they are lucky to be the guardians of this sublime patrimony, why they will hold it as we do on a repairing lease, and why they too will have a commensurate obligation to pass it on intact to those who come after.